Malik, Baylor, and Lombardo. We do have all committee members present whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call the Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order. We do have all members present, and I would ask for a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, very good. We have a few items coming before us today. The first is an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $27,945,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to retirements issued for the purpose of providing funds to pay the cost of various improvements in the city and to declare an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this next series of pieces of legislation has to do with our annual various purpose debt issuance. So this is something that we typically do at the end of the year. This first piece is we are going to roll over the note that we issued last year for an additional year. So because interest rates are high right now, we want to roll this note for one additional year and then see what interest rates are like next year, and then potentially take this issuance to long-term bonds.
Okay, very good. Questions or comments? I'm looking for hands. All right, next thing, Mr. Fricker, what would be your preference?
So for these pieces, we would like to suspend the rules.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to suspend the rules and issue a favorable report.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $1,200,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to pay the cost of acquiring and equipping motor vehicles for certain divisions in the city and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is new money. This is the same amount that we did last year. This funds the equipment replacement portion that's funded by income tax in our capital budget, and this is typically split evenly between police, fire, and our service department.
Okay, very good. Any questions or comments? All right. Motion to suspend the rules from someone, please.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to suspend the rules with a favorable report. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 All right, thank you. Next, we have an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $6 million in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to pay the cost of improving the city's municipal parks and recreational system by constructing, improving, and equipping parks and recreational facilities and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is for the Parks Capital Budget Fund. The majority of these funds will be used for improvements that we did in Canal Park Stadium. So we did the seat replacement project. That's about half of the proceeds. This will also fund many of the smaller parks projects that we did, as well as some improvements that we're going to make on the stadium next year.
Okay. I'm curious, what are those improvements on the stadium next year? Are you aware?
So there are some interior renovations that need to be done to the clubhouse that are kind of mandated by Major League Baseball. So it's to bring the stadium up to certain standards that Major League Baseball has established for all of the minor league teams.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Watching for hands.
I believe we received something about this several months ago, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
This is not like thing, right?
Okay, thank you. And I see another hand up in the chambers, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Malik has his hand raised.
Yes, Mr. Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fricker, I was just going to ask, how does this compare to the parks debt offered last year?
So last year, I believe this is much larger than last year. Last year, I think it was $1.5 million.
Okay.
But because of the stadium projects, we had to issue more this year.
Okay. And you said the stadium is about half of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some smaller, city park improvements that we've done that are also funded with this.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Do I have a motion for suspension of the rules?
Some
Second.
Motion is second, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And let's see here. Next, we have an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $11 million in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to pay the costs of constructing, reconstructing, and otherwise improving certain streets in the city of Akron and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the note issuance that goes towards transportation projects. This is the same amount that we did last year. There are several different street projects that are being funded with this.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee members or other council members? Okay, motion to suspend the rules, please.
I'll make that motion to suspend the rules. Favorable report.
Second.
And we have a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you. Next, we will be reading item number 6, ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $1,500,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to pay the costs of constructing, reconstructing, and otherwise improving off-street parking facilities in the city and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this will fund several projects that we've done in our parking decks. These include the pay station upgrades that we did, so some of the booth equipment in terms of some of the gates and things like that will replace this year. And it will also go to fund some of the concrete improvements that we're doing in some of the decks, repairing some of the concrete in some of the decks.
Very good. Questions or comments?
Yes.
Mr. Fricker, specifically which decks?
I know Cascade has some concrete work that's being done.
Okay.
Okay. If there's no other questions or comments, we would ask for a motion to suspend the rules.
I'll make the motion to suspend the rules with a favorable report.
Second.
And a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Approved. And anyone opposed? All right. Next, we have an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $1 million in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to pay the costs of the acquisition, construction, equipping, and installation of capital improvements to the city's district energy system, comprising a steam, hot water, and chilled water distribution system, a steam power plant, and a chilled water production unit, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this note issuance is for improvements, and these will deal with the chilled water system. So they are doing some capital improvements that will improve the efficiency of that system and will ultimately save on operational costs.
Very good. Questions or comments? Ms. Viviano, I'll ask you to help me if there's anyone in the chambers.
There are no hands raised here in the chambers.
Okay, then I would ask for a favorable report, suspending the rules.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please let me know by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, next we have an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of notes in a maximum principal amount of $1,600,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to pay the cost of the acquisition of certain real property in Coventry Township and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is being used to purchase the IBH property in Coventry Township. I believe we brought legislation earlier this year relating to that project. So the city and Coventry will both share equally in the debt service on this bond. Should we sell the property, we would be able to then take the proceeds and apply them towards the retirement of this note.
Excellent. Questions or comments? All right, I would look for a motion to suspend the rules and issue a favorable report.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
And a motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Finally, we have an ordinance amending number 81-2022, passed March 28th, 2022. Ordinance number 315-2022, passed November 21st, 2022, which established the annual appropriation for current expenses, other expenditures, and the capital outlays of the city of Akron for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take this one. Typically, we do 2 budget amendments in a given year. This one is really anticipating future year-end costs, where we're going to be in that kind of thing, and just kind of making sure we're within budget across the board. Some of the major pieces are explained in the memo that Ms. Biviano probably mailed out a few minutes ago. Happy to take any questions.
And I would add, we obviously, given that we just brought this in today, expect to take time on this so that we may answer any questions that you might have throughout the next week.
Okay. Yeah, I think anticipating if we can get this passed next week, but I would just ask any committee or council members, if you have questions, should they reach out? Who should they reach out to, Mr. Fricker?
Have them reach out to Mr. Wheeler.
Yes, I'll take them.
Okay, Mr. Wheeler, very good. Okay. I do not see any comments, so we have a motion to refer this item.
Mr. Chair, Councilman Malik has his hand raised.
Okay, I'm sorry. Councilman Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Fricker and Mr. Wheeler. Since we just received this memo, Mr. Wheeler, could you just kind of give a general summary of some of the changes?
Yeah, some of the highlights, starting with the general fund and kind of moving on our way down, is to cover unanticipated costs of overtime, really more so in our police and fire than anywhere else. We will be moving some of this overtime over to our ARPA fund in terms of revenue replacement. That's always been kind of our game plan for the ARPA as well. Some of the other highlights, if you just are kind of scrolling on through, come down to year-end costs. We are reallocating some snow and ice removal expenses from earlier in the year in the Special Assessment Fund, which is in Section 5. In Section 6 and 7, we're actually able to move a little bit of additional pension costs to our police and fire pension funds, so that alleviates some of the pain that we've had this year. Scrolling on through to the Community Development Fund and Section 9 and Section 10 with the Community Environment Grants Funds, we always have timing differences in terms of when we receive funds from the federal government to reimburse us for our expenses. They are reimbursement-based grants for both of those. Really, kind of everything else going down the line. Water, sewer, we have some overtime costs. Same thing with the other categories we have. We're still dealing with the effects of just unanticipated inflation across the board for chemicals, supplies, and you can also see that in our motor equipment fund, which is Section 28. So this is really just to allow motor equipment to buy the supplies that they need to get through year end. So happy to answer any other questions, but I'd say those are the highlights.
Thank you. It's really helpful, and we'll follow up with any questions after.
One thing I would like to add is the numbers contained in this ordinance are extremely conservative. We look for the places where we were under budget and basically added more than adequate amounts for in those cases. We did not take into account places where we were under budget, and therefore, in terms of the total fund, you'll see numbers that reflect an amount that we're adding to a particular fund, but keep in mind that those are overstated. So just because we're really just focusing on the areas that we were under. So in a net way, the budget numbers will be far smaller than what is reflected in this ordinance.
Okay, thank you. And just as a follow-up, Mr. Fricker, when do you imagine that the operating budget for next year will be presented?
So I think the goal is probably sometime in February.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. All right. See nothing else. Did we take a vote on referring this item?
We did not yet.
Motion for time?
Okay,
Second.
Second.
we have a motion and second for time. All in favor, let me know by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, very good. And again, any questions or information you're needing, please refer to Mr. Wheeler. All right. That concludes our legislation, and now we're going to be, been receiving a lot of good information about distribution and the status of our ARPA funds, and who will be taking the lead for us here today with the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we do have a presentation related to the overall status of the ARPA program, as well as individual information on the various projects that we have. I believe we have representatives from each of the projects that are either here in council chambers or online with us. I believe we also have one or more people from Guidehouse that can answer any questions related to the Guidehouse consulting contract that we have.
Excellent. Well, we can proceed.
So yes, we can proceed. I don't know who has the PowerPoint, but if they could go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so spending update. So as everyone knows, we received $145 million for the total ARPA award. We have received all of the funds associated with that $145 million. So we got that in two tranches. We got some of it in 2021, and we received the second tranche this June. So far, about $30 million of that has been obligated, and the meaning of obligated means that we have contracts or purchase orders in place for the spending of those funds. So some of those funds have not been spent. You see the next bullet point says that we have spent about $12.6 million of that 30, but we have committed $30 million in the form of contracts with various suppliers. The 12.6 does not reflect the monies that we will be spending here between now and the end of the year for the revenue replacement portion of ARPA. So as we talked about, the revenue loss within the general fund and other funds, what we're going to do is transfer expenses out of the general fund into the ARPA fund, and therefore we have budget in the ARPA fund, and that will help the general fund balance to the tune of whatever expenses we transfer out. And right now we're looking to do about $12 million that we transfer over to the ARPA fund. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yes. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, the online platform shows about 7.6 million?
Correct.
I was just wondering how often it's...
Yeah, so the difference between the online platform is it's really only capturing the supplier expenses, and it's missing things, and we're trying to update that now so it pulls the data from a different area of Workday, but it's missing things like the Akron Cares program, which really are journal entries that we do. So there are some internal transactions that are not reflected on that dashboard.
Okay.
But we're looking to address that. Yeah.
It would be great if those could be reflected, because we want to be accurate when we're describing it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I actually, just prior to this meeting, ran a report in Workday that shows, and you know, the PowerPoint presentation, and this is changing every day. So currently, we spend about $14.2 million. We just transferred a portion of the premium pay. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Over to the ARPA fund. So we are bringing some of those expenses over that are internal transfers that will, and again, we will try to get those reflected on the website dashboard so we could see the most up-to-date expenditure numbers.
Thank you. And I also think it would be helpful to see the committed and obligated numbers as well, because I think the obligated number particularly is helpful.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next slide shows the 9 different buckets that the money was divided into, and you can see the amount listed for each one. As we talked about, for the budget stabilization, we're going to utilize part of that $24 million this year, as well as part of the premium pay number this year. So most of our premium pay items were set up such that they're done over a 2-year period. We have one that's going to be done over a 3-year period. So we'll talk about that when we get to the premium pay component. And then the administration includes both the Guidehouse contract, our Voice contract, as well as some of the website items that we've put out there to show the data that we're collecting through the ARPA program.
Next slide. Go ahead.
Okay, you want me to do this one? Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to show is, I think there's a perception that you know, these funds are rolling out rather slowly, and there have been areas that it's taken us a while to kind of get the project stood up. But we did a little bit of comparison with some of our peers, and we have found that we actually are a little bit further down the road than many of our peer cities. So on this screen, we have a comparison with Toledo, Dayton, and Youngstown, and you know, we're further down the road than they are. So we are trying to get these dollars out in the community as quickly as we can. It's taken a while to get some of these projects stood up, but as you can see, the other thing that you could see is that you know, these later months in 2022, we're starting to spend much more money. So, and that will only continue to ramp up next year.
We can go to the next slide.
Just let me only add just a couple of things. One, especially when it comes to the timing of this, it's not only important to obviously get the funds out into the community, but also to get them out accurately. There's a significant amount of oversight and auditing when it comes to this from the state auditor and the Treasury Department as they've issued those guidelines. So accuracy is important with that audit trail to that part too. And cities do some things that are very, very good. Other things they get into, and cities differ across the state and the country about their responsibilities, what they do. You know, we stood up a couple of quick departments fairly quickly when it came to housing, because as you know, we used to do a ton of that before and kind of got back out of it, but really stood up kind of a way to be able to do that with a partner to be able to get that out there pretty quickly. That's big for an organization to be able to do it. And I think ancillarily, if that's a word, we have done some things, I think, you know, with partners, you know, and especially around community and youth opportunity and violence. We didn't have a real big role in that, even though we played a part with, you know, the school construction and sports and all the cultural things that we did. But to put that significant amount of resources and be able to do that, you know, with a person to make sure that these nonprofits, that's a big ask for an organization to be able to do it. So not only do we want to be able to get it out there quickly and make sure that these nonprofits have funds to be able to operate, to be able to reduce those things, but also there's a really strong trail of making sure that we follow those guidelines. So that's paramount as a city to make sure that we have that trail to be able to do that. I didn't want that to get lost in the conversation on that part of it too. So we want quick, but we also need accurate. Thanks.
We can move forward to the next slide.
All right. Well, thank you for letting me present this slide, Samika. I'm sure many of you guys have met me, but I'll just reintroduce myself for the record. I'm Jake Bell, the Communications and Media Supervisor in Mayor's office. This slide kind of goes over some of the communication successes we believe we've had with introducing these ARPA programs and making sure the public is well aware of the availability of funding, whether you're a nonprofit organizer or an individual homeowner in the case of the home repair program. So we've employed a number of tactics that we've done, you know, with legacy programs as well, you know, social media, press conferences, videos, as well as with the home repair program, doing a lot of physical collateral in terms of yard signs and mailers to make sure that our constituents are aware of the funding available. So this kind of goes over some of the statistics we've gathered. For example, home repair program, we received over 175,000 impressions on social media, received 1,600 plus applications in the first round. Small business relief program received 513 applications, got the word out in a number of ways there. And then our violence and intervention and prevention program have received over 116 applications, and we've received thousands of visitors to the website since launching over the summer. And we're really proud of the site as well, being able to get that information out there in a streamlined fashion. That's pretty much all I have for this slide. Thank you.
Going forward, we will have Guidehouse talk about some of the strings that are attached to the federal allocation and the framework by which we determined eligibility and funding for our programs. And after that, all of the project managers will go through and talk about their programs that they have stood up over the past couple of months. Thank you. Mitch, go ahead.
Thanks, Tamika. Pleasure to be here with you, Council. My name is Mitch Lindstrom. I'm the engagement manager for all things in supporting the City of Akron with their ARPA allotment. And so, you know, before all the project managers jump in and provide you kind of all the positive news and progression that the active projects have gone through over the last year, I just wanted to kind of remind everyone of the big strings attached, or the elephant in the room, which is there's two key sets of regulations that the city must comply with and monitor with all of the projects that you've chosen to use the ARPA funding on, many of which you'll hear about today. So first is the Relief Fund's final rule, which was published by the U.S. Treasury. Really what this set of regulations defines is the intended purpose of the funds. It sets out specifically what costs are eligible for use and outlines what information the city must document and share and report to the federal government on a frequent basis. And so much of the work ramping up for the last few months has focused strictly on assessing eligibility. But there's also, as many of these projects moved into the active and execution phase, there's also uniform guidance. This is also something that was slightly different and did not apply to all of the CARES funds you had previously received. Uniform guidance, it's officially referred to as 2 CFR or 2 Code of Federal Regulations 200. This is a set of regulations that aims to provide a universal set of standards for grants management that, in theory, reduces the administrative burden on recipients, like the City of Akron in this case, while also aiming to reduce the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse of federal funds. And so it's important to note that uniform guidance requirements are in addition to those imposed by the Treasury's final rule related to project eligibility, and that many of these uniform guidance provisions require grant recipients like the City of Akron and all of your community partners, whether it be G. Stevens or Williams Challenge or any of the other VIP grantees, to implement new policies, new procedures to ensure compliance with these requirements. And so although I will be the first to admit uniform guidance is not the most exciting topic by any means, its importance cannot be underestimated. So it's my understanding that the city will be sharing with you some of the resources and training materials we've rolled out over the last few months, both with internal City of Akron project managers, but also in our collaborations with subrecipients and community partners working on ARPA-related projects. And so I'll also note the primary eligibility framework used for vetting projects that you'll hear about today. And I want to add a disclaimer. There's a lot of nuance within this. Most of the projects we'll talk about today are categorized as public health or negative economic impact investments. What I'm about to discuss in terms of eligibility, infrastructure, premium pay, and admin expenses, we'll just kind of put those to the side for a second. But for the most part, the majority of your projects that the City of Akron's moving forward with falls into a public health or an economic category. And the Treasury lays out a two-part test that applies to all of these programs, where you use whether it's $1 of ARPA funding or $10 million of ARPA funding. So first, we must assess whether a project responds to a pandemic-related harm. Now, some of those harms are explicitly laid out in the 400-page final rule, but the city also has the ability to use local data and experiences to articulate and document additional harms. From there, we must assess who the project or the program is intended to primarily benefit. And so many of the eligible uses require a program target those who were quote unquote impacted directly by the pandemic and its negative economic consequences, or what they refer to as disproportionately impacted, for those who experienced a disproportionate public health or economic outcome as a result of the pandemic. And within that, those two broad definitions and categorizations, the final rule outlines specific definitions of eligible populations they feel fall into those buckets. And the aim of this was to reduce the administrative burden of documenting and justifying every individual project at that level. However, the city, again, and any recipient can choose to identify and justify additional impacted or disproportionately impacted populations. So as you're reviewing, what does this all mean? As you're reviewing the eligibility guidelines for some of the grant programs and the projects, know that they were all informed not only on the local expertise of those in city administration and the community partners involved in creating those programs, but there were strings attached, and some of those eligibility criteria were outlined specifically to ensure that there's compliance with the ARPA guidelines. And you'll also, the last thing I'll note is the word responsive and proportional. This is a test that auditors will look at, and probably the best example I can use to describe this in simplest forms is a project has to be proportional to the harm experience. So one example I pulled from another municipality, not in the state of Ohio, is a municipality wanted to build a brand new government building. It was $25 million, and their justification was they wanted more room for social distancing. That's not very proportional, a $25 million expense for something that could be mitigated with other less expensive, less invasive costs. So there are those tests, or as auditors refer to it, the SMRC test, that go into assessing these. And lastly, what Guidehouse has helped all of the project managers do is document these assessments and make sure they're in place so that when you do have an audit, that all of that information and the eligibility of those projects is documented on the front. And so that's my ARPA 101.
Thank you, Mitch. Now we'll move forward to the updates on active projects, and we'll start with Katie Breck on the Financial Coaches and Financial Empowerment Center. Katie, after you're done, just please direct Mitch to go to the next slide, and the next project manager can go and thereafter. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Katie Breck from the Office of Integrated Development. The City of Akron invested $600,000 over 3 years to support the Akron Financial Empowerment Center, which, as many of you know, is a partnership between the city and the United Way of Summit and Medina counties. For the first year of this investment, we spent $200,000 to support 2 financial coaches and other program-related expenses at the Akron FEC. The Akron FEC provides free one-on-one financial counseling services to help residents pay off debt and increase their savings. Since 2018, the Akron FEC has helped residents reduce their debt by over $5 million and build more than $2.2 million in savings. Our location on Kenmore Boulevard is open for in-person appointments, and our financial coaches take appointments over the phone and virtually. Next, we'll have an update about Akron Cares, our utility assistance program.
Let me just add about the financial empowerment. They do taxes, and they have expanded into small business, helping small business financial empowerment too. It's not real big, but it's something, you know, like I said, the residential part was big to be able to do that. It doesn't sit on what it does, but that's a significant number of people, and this is something that we've been committed to obviously get them into a stronger banking relationship and not be underbanked and not, you know, the loan agencies, which you see that, you know, many cities, that's just really high interest, and it's a cycle we wanted to try and help break.
So Akron was one of 5 cities to pilot the Small Business Boost program. Philip Gibson is our financial coach who is assigned to Small Business Boost, and he is well integrated in our entrepreneurial ecosystem, working with small businesses every day to bring them to understand the difference between personal finance and business finance. So it's been a really great value add to our city.
Thank you, Katie. And I think Jeff Bernowski is on the line to speak to Akron Cares, or is that, I can't see. Brian Bremer, is Brian on there? Okay, thank you. Brian, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, I'm Brian Raymond, I'm from the Utilities Business Office, and we were allocated $2 million for utility assistance through the Akron Cares program. We've assisted 2,276 households, and we have spent about $794,000 with an average of about $349 per household.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move forward to the next slide on water main replacements.
Good afternoon. This is Jeff Bernowski. I'm the Akron Water Supply Bureau Manager. The next 2 slides are associated with drinking water investment, which is very critical. The first project is the University of Akron 30-inch water main rehabilitation. This project is complete. It is approximately $700,000, and it rehabilitated 2 very large 30-inch water main valves, as well as put in line stops for a larger project along East Buckle, the former East Buckle on the University of Akron campus, which is expected this summer. The second project is a water main replacement project, which we were allocated $10 million for. This project selected a number of water mains based on their age, based on their break history, and in anticipation of street paving. And we're proud to say that this project will also eliminate 275 additional lead service lines as part of the $10 million replacement project. Next slide, please.
Hold on for 1 second, Jeff. Councilman Fusco has a question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Jeff. I applaud that, and I remember when these first were announced, Mayor and I talked a little bit about it, knowing that this is not so glamorous and doesn't, you know, the infrastructure piece, but how are we going to be able to get this all done by the time we have, which is what, 26, I think? Are we going to have enough time to get 10 million spent?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be a problem doing that. I mean, $10 million represents about 10 miles of water mains.
Right.
There's a significant more of that when you have an average age of X.
Oh,
but
I know.
We're certainly looking
just
for other
getting it
funding
done.
opportunities when it comes to water main replacements on the infrastructure bill. As soon as those guidelines come out at some particular point, there's a much greater need than there is, funding available for that part too. And I would venture to guess that I can almost guarantee I'm not going to say that. Our lead water service lines are dropping quickly every single year, and obviously the goal is to be, lead-free by X, and so this will make a significant dent on that. We were awarded some money even from the state, a significant amount of $5 million to help with that, and so there's a lot coming to replace those lines, and to where they're needed the most. Like Jeff said, breakage, the oldest. And obviously, making sure that those transmissions, people can get, clean, affordable water to their property, so.
Good, thank you.
Next slide, please. Thank you. This is $2.5 million that was dedicated specifically to lead service line elimination. We are taking this 2.5 and including it in an additional nearly $10 million, so for the purposes of removing in 2023 1,200 lead services. This $2.5 million plus an EPA grant that the mayor helped us secure in a visit to Ohio EPA for additional lead removal dollars, as well as some principal forgiveness dollars we were able to obtain through a loan program, is now dedicated to 1,200 lead services next year. So that's the conclusion of the water projects. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move forward to Helen Tomic.
Okay. Good afternoon, Helen Tomic, Long Range Planning Manager. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm going to be presenting the Joy Park Playground improvements. The City of Akron, the Akron Parks Collaborative, and Kaboom work closely with neighborhood residents and children to rebuild playground at the Joy Park. Meetings began in April of 2022 and continued through July of 2022. A website was also created to allow children and neighborhood residents, adults, to make playground equipment recommendations, suggestions as to the type of play equipment they would like to see. Construction began in July 26th and was completed on August 12th, 2022. With that, we will move on to the Perkins Pool and Bathhouse renovations.
Thank you, Helen. This is Michelle DeFiore with the City of Akron Office of Integrated Development. Perkins Pool and Bathhouse renovation is a project that we brought construction legislation in June. We advertised this project and awarded it, so this project is under construction. We had a groundbreaking a few weeks ago, and we're excited for this project to be in use next summer. Next slide. Ed Davis Community Center is also a project that we just received bids for. We're evaluating those bids, and we're looking forward to construction next year. We had a public meeting a few months ago. We had some community outreach for exterior color selection and playground types of their preference. Again, we look forward to moving forward with this project in January. Next slide. The Lot 3 Vision Plan is one of our projects as part of the Akron Civic Commons. We're working on this project in partnership with Ohio and Erie Canalway. Ohio and Erie Canalway is looking to advertise this project in January, and the city's ARPA contribution is a $5 million grant. There's additionally some funding that has been allocated for renovation of the restrooms within the Lot 3 area in the parking deck. Next slide. The Summit Lake Vision Plan is another Akron Civic Commons project that we're working on with Ohio and Erie Canalway as the lead partner. We advertised, Ohio and Erie Canalway advertised the trail portion of the project earlier this year, and they will be moving forward with construction. Well, they've already started construction, but it's a little slow going. They've got a bridge order in. With the weather, they've got some tree removal, and they're staking out the trail presently. And then first quarter of next year, we're looking to advertise the North Shore Summit Lake improvements, park space on the North Shore. Next slide. Katie, I believe this is back to you.
Thanks, Michelle. On behalf of OID, I'm pleased to present this overview of the Small Business Relief Grant Program. As you know, it was a priority of Mayor Horgan to assist our small businesses still recovering from the pandemic by investing $1 million to stand up the Small Business Relief Grants Program. Small businesses who had 2 to 50 full-time equivalents were eligible to apply for a one-time $10,000 grant that could be used for business-related expenses like rent, utilities, payroll, and investments in equipment to protect people's safety. In order to expedite the program, we partnered with a subrecipient, the Greater Akron Chamber, to administer the grant program by taking in applications, answering questions, providing technical support, evaluating the applications, processing the grant agreements, and distributing the payments. For these services, the Chamber will receive $65,000, which is the standard administrative fee of 6.5%. At the close of the application window on September 2nd of 2022, 513 completed grant applications were submitted. The first step to verifying applicant eligibility was to verify the applicant was located within an Akron qualified census tract. We use the QCT as the primary requirement to focus these funds on those businesses within parts of the city that experience the most hardship. We targeted the assistance towards employers with 2 to 50 employees. After completing the reviews for location, number of employees, and other submitted application criteria, 273 applicants were eliminated for not meeting one or more of the eligibility requirements. Once the applicant pool was reduced, all remaining applications moved to a document review. This review included verification of employment wages or contractor payments via 1099s, IRS Form 941s for quarterly wage reporting and other filings, business income tax or 1040 Schedule C and K-1 returns, and Ohio Secretary of State registrations. Where documentation was not provided or where documentation was incomplete, incorrect, or unclear, applicants were asked for additional documentation and or affidavit attestation. No business was immediately disqualified for document review if it was the only issue related to eligibility, and multiple attempts were made to contact business owners by the grant team for documentation. Ultimately, 35 businesses were further eliminated due to not providing complete documentation. Additional checks were employed to ensure businesses generated the total amount of revenue to support at least 2 or more full-time workers using the state minimum wage. Next, the grant team created an unrelieved financial impact score that considered reported revenue losses due to COVID, additional expenses related to COVID, and relief already received from other grant or forgivable loan programs like PPP. In addition, due to the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on minority and disadvantaged businesses, those companies received additional prioritization based on their status as a minority and disadvantaged business. Once the Chamber arrived at the final 100, the businesses were further reviewed in conjunction with the County of Summit for property tax compliance. Those applicants remaining in the pool were asked to provide an executed grant agreement, again attesting to the veracity of the information included in their application. Once the agreement was received, the companies were issued payments, which were distributed in late November. Next, I will turn it over to Deputy Mayor Sean Bowman for an overview of the Hospitality Reopening Grant Program.
Katie, I'll take a pause here. Councilman Malik has a question.
Thank you. A comment, really. But, I really appreciate this program. I think there's a lot of benefit, and there's a lot of, I think all of the grantees were deserving. I did just want to note that, we've talked about the value of using the qualified census tract as criteria, and I have received a number of, concerns and outreach from Ward 8 businesses and businesses that have need. And, I would hope that if we have future programs like this, that we consider whether there are, more specific criteria that could be used. I know that, last week we discussed there are areas where on one side of Market Street, they're eligible and on another they're not. I think, these QCTs, they have value, but I think there is some interest in looking at other criteria.
Yeah, let me interject just for a second. The qualified census tract is not an arbitrary thing. It is a guideline set by Treasury too. So you could not spend, and I think we were pretty clear up that there are some areas of the city of Akron that would not qualify because we don't draw the census tracts, and so to spend money out there would actually put us in an audit review. And so that's not necessarily fair to the business nor to ourselves. And so as we do those things, not that Ward 8 businesses or Ward 6 businesses or anybody else that was outside the qualified census tract is not deserving, that they very, very well could be. They just wouldn't be able to qualify for this particular tranche of grant.
Correct. So we wanted to focus these funds on those that were most disadvantaged. And I know that many businesses complained to me that they were outside of the QCT. However, we use the QCT as the primary eligibility standard to protect ourselves and also to make this as easy and efficient for a business to apply for as possible. And so that was the guidance that we use to set this program up. And there are going to be many opportunities to, as you see, there's $3 million being invested into small businesses in the city. Direct support grants aren't always the best use of funds. We know that they're very helpful, but the other technical assistance, business mentoring, and the other things that we're going to do will be an investment that is going to pay dividends in the years to come. But thank you for your comment.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor. I guess I just want to point out, it's my understanding that qualified census tracts are not the exclusive way of determining the use of these funds.
It's also the safest.
If I could finish there, right? I understand the point that Ms. Breck made about administrability. Obviously, we always have to balance between fairness and administrability. We can't take 100 hours for every application. Just passing along a concern that is, we are a small town fundamentally, and if you just have to cross the street to be inside or outside, I think we can all recognize that there may be other ways of doing this, and that's just a comment that I'm passing along. Thank you.
Point taken. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Holland has her hand raised.
Thank you. Good. Yes, Councilwoman Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to chime in and say that I 100% agree with what Councilman Malik just said, and I believe I started this last week. So I not only don't want to back away from this idea, I want to reinvigorate this idea, and I do appreciate the administrability idea. I'm also, a lawyer now for more than 3 decades. I certainly understand the concern about compliance. However, there are other ways to get at this. And I am aware and am more than happy to provide the administration with multiple instances of this, of businesses that actually received multiple rounds of PPP and also received the Small Business Relief Grant. And again, in this instance, I'm thinking of one particular, and for everybody's comfort and privacy, I'm not going to go there right here, but I'm happy to provide the backup information. This is actually somebody on the north side of Market Street, but because of the way the QCTs are cut, and I think we're all somewhat aware of this, that a business that is in relatively good shape compared to a business which by any standards has been struggling and will continue to. One got it, one did not. This becomes very difficult to slice and dice. And we should all be really mindful of that, not just from the so-called optic standpoint, but because we are a big, small town, and we care about each other, and we all want each other to win. So thank you so much, Councilman, and thank you, Mayor. I do understand the issue.
You're not wrong, and I'm sure, I think if we, whether it's, in CARES Act even had different guidelines than this, and so as you go through those guidelines, I don't think we've ever been rigid to say, it's with this necessarily the tranche of dollars, but that necessarily mean there isn't other qualified monies that would be available to be able to do that. And we've made a commitment to be able to find and be able to do that too. Where they come from, we still kind of have to figure out what those guidelines will be. So you're not wrong. It's
I
also,
appreciate
you're right,
you looking into it.
It's not an easy decision either when you're picking essentially a winner and a loser, but it's based on guidelines you're not necessarily drawing. But I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I would just like to chime in for a second on this, and just from like an audit trail perspective, I know we're talking about the equity and everything, and we're relating it back to the QCT and how that's administered, but based on the programs and just having been through audits before, this is a pass-through program, and because it's a pass-through program, we need to track the distribution from when we receive the initial 2 tranches to the setup list program, to the chamber, to the recipients. So there is a lot of moving pieces to this, and the reality is it's not a simple program just to set up quickly.
Yep. So, Sean Volman, Deputy Mayor, Integrated Development. An offshoot, a subset, and I guess we can go to the next slide, of the small business relief is the hospitality industry. One of the hardest hit industries right away after COVID hit was the hospitality industry. We wanted to set up a potential program for hotels and motels that were forced to close, and due to COVID, and we set aside a relatively small portion of money, $250,000. Again, it was QCT based hotels that were closed for at least 1 week. We set it up based on the total number of formula based on the total number of rooms and the amount of time that each individual hotel would have been shut down. We did only receive one application, and we ended up expending $142,000. And we can move on.
Next slide, please. Again, Gert Wilms, Chief of Staff to Mayor Horrigan. At this point, I would definitely like to take the opportunity to thank all of our partners that have helped us not only determine what we should do with this money, but also distributing this money. I'm here very specifically to report out on the South Akron campus. It's deja vu for you all since we just talked about this at Safety Committee. Again, a very, very special thank you to the partners that came to the table with this particular program, Summit County, the university, and the city of Fairlawn. It's an opportunity where we're splitting the cost of a camera surveillance project 3 ways, Summit County and the University of Akron. We created an intergovernmental agreement, and that council passed that, or is passing that today, to allow us to leverage these dollars. So we can really work out with this pilot project an opportunity to grow this, not only just for that particular area, but other neighborhoods in Akron could definitely benefit from this type of opportunity. The Summit County has taken the lead on this. They have employed MCM Consulting and Thrasher to really work out the details. It is currently out to bid. Our commitment is $1 million. Currently, the estimates are what the estimates are. It's under $1 million, but I think we can all appreciate with inflation, we will probably hit that $1 million mark. Thank you all. Next slide.
Good afternoon. The flat camera project was taken on to install license plate reader technology across the city. The idea was to look at our hotspot maps because one of the things we're trying to do is combat the violence that was going on and that spike of violence across the city. And what we looked at was the incidence of violent crime, particularly gun-related crime across the city. And so we used these hotspot maps to identify where those were occurring with the most frequency. And then the flat cameras, with the use of these maps and other data that were available to our crime analysts, we were able to deploy a total of 145 cameras across the city. This project was 125 of the flat cameras. These cameras, you'll notice on the slide when you talk about AI technology here, these identify license plates. They read license plate numbers. The AI comes in our ability to put in the description of a vehicle example, a red Honda with a bumper sticker, and we can actually put that information into Flock, and it will search the incidents where a vehicle matching that description comes through and log it. So this gives us the opportunity to put out hot lists for wanted vehicles, stolen, this includes stolen cars, but also vehicles associated with violent crime suspects. And it gives us the opportunity to have those alerts go directly to our officers that are right there in the neighborhood so that they can respond to the area. This project is mostly complete. We did spend $315,000 already for the startup spend on this. All told, we have 138 cameras now. I know at one point that includes 20 at the University of Akron, so we're at 115 of the 125 that are listed there on the screen. And all told, there are 73 locations that those cameras will be installed in. Some locations will have one camera, others might have four. It depends on the location. So we expect that in the next 4 weeks, we will have all the cameras up and running, and our officers will be taking advantage of that technology.
Thank you, Captain Posey. Next slide.
Good afternoon, Danico Buckley Knight, Youth and Community Opportunity Director for the City of Akron. And as you can see, we've allocated $7.5 million around violence intervention and prevention. Year to date, there's been 1.3 million spent. And what we were able to do was allow each of the grantees that are on the right side provide the City of Akron with the end of year report. And what you can see here is the metrics. We've touched 4,541 individuals with services through VIP funding programming. And we specifically also have 163 youth that's been provided with a focused mentorship program. We had over 80 organizations apply for round 3. We're vetting through those organizations' applications and proposals right now. We did about 20 interviews last week, and we'll be continuing to interview organizations with the goal of identifying those organizations and giving them their award by the end of the year.
Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Fricker, Finance Director. I'm going to cover the premium pay bucket of ARPA. So like a lot of cities, the City of Akron decided to utilize some of its funding for premium pays for our employees. We decided to roll this out in various forms to all classified employees of the City of Akron. So classified employees were eligible, unclassified employees, such as the administration, the mayor's cabinet, the law department, the city council, and the courts were not eligible. So far, we've distributed about $3.7 million. We have one small distribution to go before the end of the year, so we should spend about $4 million this year on that. And then, depending on the various bargaining agreements, some were covered a 2-year period and some covered a 3-year period. So there will be expenditures for this next year and also in 2024.
Next slide, please.
Good afternoon, Helen Tillman, once again with Long Range Planning. This particular slide talks about a relationship between the City of Akron and local CDCs. We partnered with community development corporations to proactively address the negative economic impacts of the pandemic by investing in projects in neighborhoods within the footprint of each CDC. Applications were issued earlier this summer. 8 CDCs submitted an application for a total of 12 projects. The request is $1.9 million, and we've allocated approximately $1.5 million. We have, after the applications were submitted, we have met with each CDC to talk through the application, to talk through the process and what they were thinking in terms of funding, and we are hoping to make recommendations within the next week or so. Next slide, please.
Ms. Tomei?
You had a question?
Yes.
I was just wondering whether those applications could be shared with us.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the next project is the I Promise Affordable Housing Project. This is a partnership between the City of Akron and the East Akron Neighborhood Development Corporation for the construction of a 50-unit apartment building located on South Maple Street. This includes 9 two-bedroom units, 38 three-bedroom units, and 3 four-bedroom units. Groundbreaking ceremony took place in September of 2021 with an anticipation completion date sometime in end of March. As of the end of October, the project was 66% complete. They are targeting tenant move-ins sometime in the beginning of April, and pre-leasing activity is scheduled to begin in January of 2023. With that, we can move to the Affordable Housing and Acquisition and Rehabilitation Grant Program.
Yes, hi. Hello again. We, when we set up the... When we set up the home repair program, which we'll talk about next, one of the things that came out was what about, because that was set up for owner-occupied houses. One of the things that came up was what about affordable rentals. So we launched a affordable housing acquisition and rehab program. We seeded it with $3.5 million, received applications recently, and have made 3 awards. But the idea is for nonprofits, we wanted to have nonprofits acquire, rehab, and rent affordable housing. And next, I saved what I truly think is the best for last, is the ARPA Home Repair Program. You're all familiar with it. We've met in all of your wards. We discussed this program throughout the summer. We have we had set aside approximately $20 million to fund our home repair in the city of Akron. We have taken in applications. In the first group alone, we had over 1,600. We are going through in the process of doing inspections. If you see the updated numbers that we have, and we also circulated did the overall program get circulated to? So you should all have an update that Glenn Stevens provided that's separate from this update that shows what we've been doing with that project. This has the high level. We've inspected, at this point in time, we've inspected 81 homes. We've completed repairs on 20 homes. As Gert mentioned earlier, about partners in allocating and spending these funds. I think this one, especially with the partnership with Glenn Stevens, assisting and we have Thomas Tatum, I believe, did he? No, he's hiding behind. He has done the unbelievable job in assisting, standing up this project as well. And I think it's something, we spent a lot of time standing it up over the summer. Now we're really into inspections and getting into homes and fixing homes. And Glenn's team is also on the Zoom. So when we do general question and answers, if you have questions as well. But I see one.
This is Linda Moby, and I don't know how we're doing the question and answer, but since you've been asking, people have been asking questions and getting answers. Could you tell me, with this particular project, how many of the individuals that we have approved for these funds are senior citizens?
I do not have that information in front of me, but we can look into whether or not we have that information.
If we don't, we need to get it, please.
Okay.
I'm troubled by the process, but I want to know. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
So I have the PowerPoint that was emailed to us. I think Joan sent it to us.
Mm-hmm.
So they have the breakdown of the applications on here, the ones that are in the queues, the qualified census tract, and the ones that are not.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that part of it, but when they break it down to the projected and the actual of the people who are actually been awarded the grants, the numbers are great, but I would like to know, and it may take some time and, for Glenn's staff to put it together, but I would like to know for this council, the individuals who were awarded, because in the beginning, I think it was Karen who sent us over a list of those individuals per ward, and how much was spent per house. I would like to know that.
Yeah, we can have that information to you. The average is about 20,500 right now, but that's, you know, the average overall of the houses that have been finished. So,
Okay,
but
so-
there's a spread within those.
Okay, so the ones that they have completed,
Mhm.
if we could get a list of those individuals and how much was spent per completion. And again, of course, what Councilwoman Mobian brought up as well, how many of them fall within the senior citizen track as well?
Okay, we can find that information out.
Okay, thank you.
Sean?
Yeah. Sean coming in. Oh, hello.
Councilwoman, I'd like to add a couple things. One, has been pointed out, these funds that we receive on an emergency basis, the history of this program, are going to be vetted. So every process, every property that gets inspected and goes to the grant program, we have a breakdown of not only what happens in that home, the amount of money that are spent, the type of rehabilitation was done, the contractor that was selected. So when we go through the proctological exam from a HUD auditor, a federal auditor, a state auditor, that information won't be there. So as the repairs are done and completed, that information can be provided on a spreadsheet that we are already getting from Mr. Stevens. And as we get it, we can share that information.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. I'm also looking through the PowerPoint, and I think there's a lot of helpful information, so I appreciate it. I guess I was just wondering, with regard to the question whether, you know, there may be some concern around privacy in terms of the names and addresses. I mean, you know, folks who applied, who are in financial need, there may not be a need to actually share the names particularly. I mean, I appreciate that by ward we have that, and it would be great to have it sliced by, you know, senior citizen status and things like that. But I wonder whether we can maybe omit the names just out of respect for folks who applied and are in need.
Yeah, I don't think we've been specifically asked for that information yet, so, but you know, we can look at that, you know.
You want me to do? Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. So with the Guidehouse Consulting Services, they have been obligated $1.6 million, and to date, they have billed us for $944,333. So with this contract, what is entailed in the contract is compliance monitoring. They have helped us build our grants, so the grant administration, they've helped us build our programs to make sure that they are in compliance with the federal guidelines. They have helped us tremendously with our federal and financial reporting on a quarterly basis, and they have provided technical assistance not only to us, but also to our partners as well. So specifically our violence intervention partners, to help them with their reporting guidelines to make sure that they are in compliance if and when they are audited as well. I want to be clear that I know that there has been some contentions about us contracting with Guidehouse, but it has been a very enjoyable time to work with them and learn from them, as we do not have the bandwidth or capacity on this staff to build. All of these things are done within this year. Like, that is amazing to me. I don't know what it is to you. I know that, you know, not sitting in our offices, there's always room to critique and to do better. We can do better. But just saying that the small amount of staff that you've seen on this call, in this meeting today, to put up these programs within this year, I think is amazing. We don't have the capacity on staff. We don't have the bandwidth. And quite frankly, we have learned a lot. The expertise that we've gained from contracting with Guidehouse is priceless. So I will turn it over to our finance guys because they work with them just as much as I do, especially on the financial reporting side and working with our pulling things from Workday. It is, what you see is not what we do on it. Like, there's so much behind the scenes that if it would take up this entire, we would be here until 7 o'clock.
All right, so the Treasury Department built a very complex portal that you utilize to file your quarterly report. So every quarter we have to file a series of probably a dozen or so different spreadsheet templates that are very complicated, and Guidehouse developed a methodology for collecting all that information right out of our Workday system, which makes it much easier to do that. So that's something that, like, could we have done that, within the finance department? Yes, but we have so many things going on that, as Tamika said, we just don't have the bandwidth to devote to all these different things. So we really have benefited from having extra bandwidth from Guidehouse in order to do the reporting that we need to do.
And to take it a step further, the other side of all of this is the monitoring component. We are already a fairly complex organization just based of our size. I know that, Mitch earlier had stated that the purpose of the uniform guidance is to simplify and expedite the process. Unfortunately, that's just not the case for us. So the tracking requirements is something that especially that they can help facilitate and get us, audit ready almost. As we go into, our next fiscal audit, we will have in advance materials from every piece, whether it's the premium pay component or the housing repair or, some of our thought processes. It's been documented in a fashion that we cannot do internally at this point.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing how this has been for you and that it is, in fact, worth every penny. And I hear you. I think that is the bottom line concern, all puns intended. Is it worth every penny? And so I guess one of the questions I have for the team, and I do recognize that in a sense you have, ultimate bottom line responsibility here. Do you foresee that your level of need, now that we are somewhat into this process, has declined, will continue to decline, and that we can expect a reduction in service need, service usage, and in turn, fees?
So I believe we do expect that. We knew right up front that the bulk of the costs were going to be in the very, the first 6 to 12 months as we stood up the infrastructure for doing this entire program, setting up the reporting, setting up the website, setting up the templates for subrecipient monitoring, all those types of things. So I believe the answer is yes. Now, having said that, we are just now getting into the subrecipient monitoring. So I think we want to see how that goes and how involved that is in terms of what our utilization of Guidehouse will be for performing that monitoring.
Fair enough, Mr. Fricker, and so that you know where I'm coming from. I spent a good amount of time last week talking to a young man who is a medical student, who's a medical access activist, who told me about an exciting project that is underway among neighbors to our west in Toledo, using $800,000 in ARPA funding, matched by private donations, yielding, interestingly, coincidentally enough, $1.6 million. This community has joined forces with something called RIP Medical Debt. Now, if you're not familiar with this, this is an organization, a nonprofit, that actually buys bundled medical debt that would otherwise possibly be purchased by a collection firm. And they, in turn, retire this debt. the efficacy of this program is such that they can retire $100 in medical debt with $1 in purchase. The anticipated retired medical debt from $1.6 million is $240 million. So I ask not so much to challenge your need or the usefulness, but because $1.6 million just took on kind of a magical quality to me. So, you know, in the spirit of wringing out every last drop that we can have from this truly, as we've said a million times, once in a lifetime infusion of funding, this is why I ask. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you can see my hand or not.
Yeah, actually, when they have their screen shared, I can only see just a few names, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a follow-up to Councilwoman Holland's comments. And I do appreciate all the work that's been done by Guidehouse. I guess my question to the staff at this point, do we feel that we have a handle on the template or whatever we need to develop, where we can, even if you decided to hire a staff person for a year or more, you still would be saving lots of money that this person would just be totally dedicated to keeping track of a lot of these dollars. And I realize they give you a lot of input on a lot of things, but you can consult with them as needed, but you can have a possible person that's just dedicated to keeping track of all of this. Somehow look at how we can minimize some of these dollars. Because I still haven't heard anything yet about the evictions problem that we have here in this city. And I just want to know, what are we doing in that area? But maybe we haven't gotten to it yet. But that's a serious concern of mine. And I just wanted to just point out that there's no question, I'm sure you needed Guidehouse's help at the front end and maybe ongoing. But hopefully there can be some reduction in this because that's quite a chunk of money. And I've said it before, and I will continue to say that. And I'm sure they're providing expertise, which is good, but we still need to figure out, is there another way we can do this? And make sure we're safe from any violations of the federal guidelines. Thank you.
Councilwoman Amobian, thank you for your question. We just had conversations with Summit County today. They are still in the final stages of processing all of the applications that are still pending for evictions. They partnered with the United Way to expend CARES Act dollars to pay rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and utility assistance. And I don't think I'm misquoting her, but Greta Johnson told me they've paid over $65 million so far. They are working to, and I do not recall how many applications she said are still pending. So coming out of that, recognizing the fact the county is no longer going to provide that programming, we have put in our operating budget for next year $500,000 for right to counsel in eviction cases. So we will be standing that program up. Council President has worked with us as well to do a program not only to mentor and educate tenants, but landlords. And we've sent that to leadership today to work through some of that as well. So both of those will be provided in the coming months to council, and the opportunities are there. We are trying to have a conversation with somebody we already contract with to potentially do that counsel for evictions. If that doesn't work out, we'll probably be putting out an RFP to get somebody to do those services at the Akron Municipal Court.
And I hope you would come back to us to explain how you arrived at 500,000 when we're looking at, what, 65 million already spent by the county. But just looking at Akron residents, do we need to set aside much more than that? I mean, for the reputation we have with evictions, that really needs to be a real high priority for us.
It is not going to be rental assistance. It is right to counsel for the $500,000, to have an attorney standing next to you, helping to mitigate, mediate, and hopefully avoid evictions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But what I would like for us to do is look at a more comprehensive plan that may include rental assistance, because we need to do something to help these folks. These folks are impacted by the pandemic. So if we're just talking about $500 for legal fees or whatever, we need to really be thinking more comprehensively in terms of what else can we do to help folks avoid evictions, and what do we do to help them? Akron has an awful reputation, and we got to do something about that. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on the costs of the audit. And the reality is, we don't know how they're going to test or who is going to be testing other than our current external auditors. So when that comes into play, this is all new programming, new funding, and I would expect in some capacity that every program that is being presented right now will be touched by testing we haven't even seen yet.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we can go to the next slide and finish up the presentation. So we contract with Market Me 24/7 to do our ARPA website. And
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can you pull that microphone a little closer?
Can you hear me now?
Thank you.
So we contracted with Market Me 24/7 LLC, and we brought the website up for $41,500, and actually Jacob Bell is actually updating that website, and we've married it rather with our Workday system to make sure that as we're spending money as it goes through, you can see how much we're spending. And I've been told that not many cities have actually brought up a tracking system so that you can see what they've spent. What they have done is, you see in the news, similar to us, that where they have passed legislation and they've allocated that funding, they have not spent it out the door. So ours is where you can actually see where we're spending that money. I will turn it over, you're still here, to Brian Angeloni to talk about our contract with Voorhees.
Thanks, Tamika, and I'll make this brief. So we've hired a local firm who has a large presence in Ohio, so they have some complexity, some knowledge of the complex, to represent us in sort of navigating the whirlwind of what is the super circular to CFR 200. It's a very nuanced area of the law, and so that we've hired them to help us guide us through that to some extent. But, you know, as with anything, we're very cost conscious, so to the extent that we can create templates and forms of our agreements, we are doing so.
And I thank you all for your time and attention today. We do have an appendix here. We also have sent to you guys a ton of information around what we've been doing so that you can find out about all of the programs a little bit more than just the one page that you've seen today. If you have any additional questions that you see or bring up after you look through those documents, feel free to email me or the project manager directly, and Gert, copy Gert. We can go from there. So we can all take any questions if you have any additional questions now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of information, and I think we can come to questions here. And Mr. Neal, see your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to those who presented. My question is still the same. I don't know if we can go back to that one screen where it showed very clearly the buckets and how much was spent in each bucket. My question is, can we get a breakdown on how that was spent, you know, per ward? It had like park and recreation, it had different things. I know that housing, I have not been able to open up the one on mine, so I'm going to try to switch it to another area. I've heard colleagues say that that's been easier to track. So I will take a look at that. But like investment in park and recreation infrastructure, have no problem with money that was spent on the parks that we have allocated money toward. But I would like to know, how does that equate on the total investment when we break it down to those census tract areas that qualify? As I've mentioned, I have great concern when it comes to youth violence. Can we track how that is impacting our different wards? And what are we putting in place to make that sustainable? I like to see that investment, especially since my ward has been identified as one that the city classified as a hotspot area. When I looked at the investment of the ring cameras, that's not, my ward is not in that area. So to offset that, to balance that, what is the equitable investment? And then I guess that's the bottom line too. Since this is setting a precedent for us going forward, what are the equitable metrics that we're using to make the decision on where we're making the investment? Because I'm assuming we're going to use those standards going forward when we make investments. And then the last thing is this. Since we're setting precedent, and this, we know when this came in, the charge to us was to create the transparency citizen engagement component. I think the piece that's missing is the citizen engagement component. And if on our website, and this goes back to what council passed 7 years ago, before Horgan's administration, so 8 years ago possibly, where our budget was online, we could see where citizens want us to invest this money. So to summarize my questions, one, where we have the buckets, and this one that's up right now isn't the one that were circles. Can we see that and see what the equitable investment, see what metric was used to make sure that there was equitable investment for those areas that qualified? Two, what are the equitable metrics? What are we using to make sure that we are investing? What are the metrics that we're using to make sure that we're making equitable investment? This has been a question that's been asked long before even ARPA, yes, that's the one, long before even ARPA dollars came into play. And then last but not least, as we're putting things in place, we've heard this based on issues that we're dealing with in our community, not just White Pond, but I'm going to use White Pond since that's the one that's the most current. Are we putting in, using technology that allows our constituents to be engaged throughout the process? With legislation, I know there's tools out there, we just have to select one, but we've already passed one with putting the budget online, which will show, it's not just a picture that shows how much we spent, but citizens can engage and say how much they would like to see spent, and it shows us how it impacts our overall budget. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Neal, thank you.
You can help me out here. Any other hands or questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Gert Wilms is here. I think she wants to address that.
Thank you. Ms. Wilms?
Mr. Neal, thank you for your questions. It'll take a little bit for the team to respond to all of that information. I know everybody was provided heat maps with some of the other spending, but in addition to that, we can supplement some of your other requests. And again, we have the DEI director here, Tammy Tucker. Part of what the task force asked us to do, the ResJ report, was to really invest and upgrade our technology. And part of that investment is a new website to help us get the community engagement part out there. We had internal conversations this week, and I think if committed to going, and I might say it wrong, but Emily can correct me, Zen City, where we can do that community engagement aspect of it. And if you ask me to tell you more than that, with that equipment, I can't. But what these guys are telling me is there's a real opportunity to go to the next level where we're missing that. And we definitely heard that during the White Pond, is the process needs to change. You know, posting in the Beacon doesn't work. posting in the Akron Legal News is going to work less. You know, what can we do to change that? Because people are not receiving information the same way they used to. And I will compliment Councilman Malik, who made every attempt with White Pond, but for standing on his head, and that brought people to the table a little too late. So it is definitely measures and accountability and really looking towards the future, knowing that these things are out here. You've brought them to our attention. Task force members have brought them to our attention. We want to thank them for their work and include that in some of the ARPA investment that we are making in Akron.
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Mosley has her hand raised.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mosley?
Thank you. On the youth violence, are these real-time budget numbers?
That is actually what their contract was. That is not at all of that was spent. I'm not sure.
On the dashboard, shows exactly where they're at currently.
Okay, they look a little different from the numbers
You mean
I
on
saw.
the slide that's up right now?
Right.
That's the total allocation for the entire program, yeah.
Can you get us some information based on how much has been spent? Because these numbers look different from the ones I saw last week.
Yeah, I do believe they have a breakdown on the individual project slides. I think we have amounts per provider, yeah.
If I might, the slide in front of you, that $10.5 million for violence in prevention, that covers the camera projects as well, from dash cams to the pilot camera program to the South Akron and the VIP grant program. So that's all the commitments that's going towards any project that falls within the city's violence prevention project. The two spent to date, we ran the numbers last night, so that I think it's Danico on the slide for VIP here. That 1.3 is how much has been provided to grantees to date as of yesterday. And just note that a lot of those grants are reimbursement. So, you know, there's still work being through those. Yeah.
We can have Danico send you round 1, round 2, and they are working on round 3, send you all those lists so you know who received what.
I have those. He sent me those. I have those. I'm just trying to see if we're in real time because the numbers I had before are not consistent with the ones I see here. So that's what the question was.
And it's reimbursement. Until that agency spends the money and asks us to pay them back, that's, you know, we're at the mercy of the way the program runs.
Okay, so
it is up to date. So the 1.378 is what we have spent to dates from last night. So
okay,
that's how much we've reimbursed.
So now I'm going a step further. What happens if they don't spend all the money? Where does the money now go? Does it go back into a pot? Do you reach back out to another nonprofit who maybe have not, you know, was not approved? I mean,
all of them are spending all of their money, and I don't know if Danico is still on or not, but
yeah, I'm still on.
Okay.
As of my conversations with the grantees from round 1, there's one organization that has informed me that they'll have basically a month of expenditures that they're not going to spend. And that's because they started their program in February of 22. So all of the other grantees are confident that they're going to spend their money. Most of them have already spent all of the funds allocated for this year.
And I would add that many of these grantees, although you see the number on the right under FY 2022 budget, I believe the city has left it open that many of those contracts could be renewed for either 2 or 3 years. And so my understanding is part of Danico and Tamika's process, kind of doing the end of year closeout, is kind of determining, you know, how much have they spent last year? Are they able to spend those funds in the following year? And if not, you know, what can we do to support them, or what are our different options?
So do we have any of the nonprofits within that program that have applied for every round? It's not like, if I apply for the first round and I'm awarded, are they applying for round 2 and 3? We're not doing that, are we? Okay. Good to know that. And then lastly, the gentleman online mentioned something about the dash camera funding is within this budget right here. And the Ring camera as well?
Not dash camera. Dash camera is an ARPA program through the state.
Because he just said it was.
I think we heard Ring camera, but not dash camera is diced out. It's an ask that we have a grant pending with the state of Ohio at this point.
Okay, we could get clarity on that because he did say dash camera.
But
I think he meant the Ring cams, yeah.
Okay, because there's a big difference in pricing here.
Right.
Okay.
Dash cameras are not in this program.
Okay.
It is ARPA dollars, but through the state, the OCJS opportunity.
Right, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you for your time. We will definitely make every effort to get answers to all the questions.
This slide is available to us. We can keep it.
Yes, it has been emailed to you. All of this has been emailed to Joan, and I think she forwarded it to all of the council members. And we sent along additional information that is in zip files. And if you guys have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sarah, are there any other questions or comments? We've been at it here for a bit.
There are no hands raised here in chambers. I can see that Councilman Neal has his hand raised.
Yes, Councilman Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to speak on behalf of one of the challenges. When I heard this is a reimbursable grant, don't know if there's been discussion with those that have been receiving the grants to try to run this in a different manner where rather than reimbursable, they could submit a purchase order ahead of time and it either come from the city and they be paid, because it's been challenging with many groups, one, having the money for reimbursement, but then two, I don't know if our city has improved their process, but there have been organizations that have had to wait 6, 9 months to a year to get reimbursed. And these organizations cannot sustain that. And then lastly, I heard about putting them in the budget for next year. I'd like to make sure, I'd like to have a better understanding on the sustainability line items within our budget. And I say that for this, Mr. Chairman. The basketball courts in my ward have been redone for the first time in 25 years. Forest Lodge, which is a city lodge, was not redone by the city. If not for St. Sebastian's, we would have had to condemn Forest Lodge and tear it down. So there's something wrong within our process, our budgeting process. Oh, LeBron James gifted us with basketball courts over at Perkins Pool. I invite you to go by and take a look at those courts now. We didn't maintain them. We all know if we purchase a home, that sooner or later we're going to have to repair the roof, replace the hot water tank. We put that in our budget. But it seems within the city, we don't do that. Oh, but for the grace of God, for COVID and ARPA funds, that made it possible for us to do a lot of this. And so my concern, and I think our responsibility as council, is to make sure that we have a process in place that clearly shows how we can sustain these funds so that years from now, this won't just be a blip on the screen. Again, $143 million. Everything we touch, there should be a shift to such a degree to where it changes our process that led us to where we weren't able to maintain or address the needs. This is not a criticism of anybody that's here, because we know that we're dealing with the systemic issues that got us here. But we've got $143 million, and the things that we put in place should be measurable and clearly definable so that we know going forward how we're going to fund these things, how we made the decision to fund what we're funding, and that what we're doing will be sustainable. One of them, though, I want to go back to the one with the youth violence prevention groups. To make it, is the shift to make them more effective, is looking at, since we're partnering with them, not making it so much a reimbursable grant, because for a lot of them, that is challenging, especially since we don't have the manpower in-house to reimburse them in a timely manner all the time. I've got multiple examples of groups that have had to wait, some up to a year, some never even got reimbursed, and they just gave up. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, what do we have? Anything else?
I can chime in real quick.
I'm sorry.
I'll chime in real quick.
Sure, Brian Angeloni would like to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, just to sort of clarify, expound upon some of Mr. Neal's questions. So I just want to be clear, the way that we've structured agreements with all of these different programs, we've taken each one of these programs individually and essentially looked at them, you know, on a case-by-case basis, and we've developed agreements consistent with those programs. They differ greatly. But one thing I will say is, with respect to the violence prevention intervention program, we basically structured the grant agreements in 3 different ways. There are 3 different categories. One is a wholly reimbursable basis, so everything is on a reimbursement basis. 2 is we've fully funded some of them, and 3 up front, depending on the need or depending on the particular project. And 3 is that we have done a hybrid. Where a party cannot get underway without some seed money, but by and large they can use a reimbursement basis to go ahead and engage in the program and then get reimbursed. So what we've done is we've approached each one of these projects sort of, you know, holistically, carefully, thoughtfully. We've worked with the parties that we're dealing with who've been awarded, and then we're, you know, doing that with an eye that's most protective towards the city. These are federal funds that are highly, highly regulated, and we are going to be on the hook for every penny of this if there is an audit and something is misappropriated or misspent. So we are doing this in the most protective way possible for the city so that the taxpayers don't get hit on the backside for some errant program or some errant project. So that's the way we've approached it. Many different facets to it, but I just wanted to explain it is complex, and we have thought about it, and we've been thoughtful and careful in our planning.
Thank you. All right, any other comments or questions?
There are no hands raised here in chambers, Mr. Chair.
Okay, yeah, thanks again to everybody for, you know, putting this together, and I think this this shows that we do have the ability to manage this, but it is a big elephant to manage. So look forward to, you know, having continued updates. And at this point, I think we can adjourn.
That is the final committee meeting of the day. Council will meet at 7 p.m. tonight. Thank you.